Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about how to optimize protein intake for performance. So we've already talked about general proteins, and now we're going to be touching on how to optimize your protein intake, timing, distribution, what kinds of proteins you should be taking in, and things such as that. To begin, we always like to take a historical approach. And this is a really cool story. If you look back, one of Dr. Wilson and my favorite creatures was Milo of Croton. And he was the first individual to use progressive resistance training combined with high protein intake. And what progressive resistance training is what he would do is he took a calf when it was very small, and he would walk around the Olympic Stadium with the calf. And every day he would do this. Well, over time, the calf got bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's what progressive resistance training is. It's just lifting heavier weight every time you go into the gym, or for him, every time he walked around the track. So that was really cool. And on top of that, he combined it with a super high intake. Now, I'm not saying this is actually what he consumed, but this is what people say. That he consumed nearly 58,000 calories. And it's purported that he ate 20 pounds of meat daily, 20 pounds of bread, and drank 20 gallons of wine. And as you can see, he was a physical prowess. He was a monster. So he's one of our favorite guys in history. Here's a really good paper that if you guys want to look into, published in JISSN by Dr. Wilson and his brother Dr. Gabriel Wilson. And this basically looked at contemporary issues in protein requirements and consumption for resistance-trained athletes. So specifically for athletes, this is a great paper to look into. So if we look at the studies that have assessed protein needs, there's two things that have been looked at. Basically acute studies, which look at nitrogen balance, and then we have our long-term studies. So what is nitrogen balance, right? So nitrogen balance is equal to nitrogen intake minus nitrogen excretion. So how much you're taking in minus how much you're excreting, right? And here's some relevant studies that have been done on it. Tarnopolsky did two studies looking at the protein needs for sedentary individuals, people who don't work out, for bodybuilders, and for endurance athletes. And what he found was quite interesting. Here's protein needs, grams per kilogram per day. And as you can see, bodybuilders and endurance athletes need way more than sedentary individuals. Now this is interesting. Why is this the case? Well, if you look at endurance athletes, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, endurance exercise shuts off protein synthesis and increases protein breakdown, right? It does those two things. Secondly, endurance exercise, you get especially if you're running like downhill or you're running hills and things like that, you get a great deal of skeletal muscle damage. It's heavy eccentrics. You're running downhill. You're tearing the muscle. So we need amino acids and protein to repair that muscle tissue. One other thing is that endurance exercise may use amino acids for fuel. When we run out of carbohydrates, the next thing that we turn to is those amino acids. We break them down in order to keep fueling us for the endurance bout. And as far as endurance, there's certain activities such as uphill cycling or even regular cycling, like on a Wingate, which actually may stimulate muscle growth itself. So what about resistance training? Well, we know resistance training increases skeletal muscle protein synthesis proportional to the intensity, so how hard you're working, and the volume, so how much you're actually doing sets times weight times reps of that exercise bound. But what happens with resistance training is you get a great deal, again, of skeletal muscle damage. You're breaking down the muscle. When you're doing even squats, when you're doing squats, and you're doing sets of 12 to 15, you're tearing apart your quads, right? You're tearing those muscle fibers. They need amino acids and protein to be repaired. So we really need to fuel that in order to repair that tissue so we come back bigger, we come back stronger. And also, greater muscle tissue size may require greater protein intake. So someone who's 105 pounds and their resistance training certainly wouldn't need as much as someone who's 300 pounds and a professional bodybuilder. They're going to need a lot more because they have just a larger amount of muscle tissue, right? So what about timing? And this is a huge controversial topic in our field. And this is a landmark study by Esmark in 2001. And basically they looked at consuming protein immediately or 2 hours after resistance training. And if you look at percent strength increase, immediately after you get a 50% increase. Meanwhile, a 2-hour delay, you're somewhere around like 30 to 35% increase. So this goes to show that timing plays an important part. So a lot of people bring protein shakes to the gym and immediately consume it after. That may be ideal, right? Or if you drive to the gym, as soon as you get home, maybe that's a perfect time to have your protein rather than wait or delay until dinner or something like that. And this kind of confirms it. Here's thigh muscle area. If you look at immediately after, you get a huge increase in thigh muscle area compared to a 2-hour delay. So if your goal is to build muscle, then certainly timing of protein intake may be essential. Now, what about pre or post workout? Pre or post workout nutrition? Well, Dr. Kevin Tipton and colleagues in 2001 looked at the effects of administering 6 grams of essential amino acids plus 35 grams of sucrose. And they gave it either pre or post exercise in 21 participants. And you can clearly see that pre was superior to post. Interesting, right? Well, the reason could be is because of blood flow and timing. So blood flow delivers these amino acids and increases protein synthesis during the exercise bout and immediately after. So if you have them before, you're delivering these amino acids to your muscles while you're working out. So you're repairing them a lot faster, and you're getting them delivered directly into the muscle. So if you delay, like in that other study, if you delay by 2 hours, blood flow is not going to be as enhanced as during the exercise or immediately after the exercise, right? So for those looking to optimize their physiques, it may be ideal to consume some branched chain amino acids immediately before you work out, and then just to be safe, it'll probably last for a decent amount of time, but just to be safe, why not consume a protein shake immediately after? And Dr. Antonio's study, which we'll talk about later, Dr. Antonio just published a study in 2014 in which he found that overfeeding on protein, these participants had 4.4 grams per kilogram per day. 4.4 grams, that's like, for someone my size, that's like 300 grams of protein a day. Incredible. They found that there was no increases in fat mass compared to just consuming like 1.5 or the RDA. So overfeeding on protein doesn't necessarily seem to be a bad thing, but it can only really be good, right? So that's something to keep in mind. What about digestion rate? Well, there's 2 different proteins that we usually talk about. There's several different, but the 2 main ones are whey and casein. So whey it mixes easily in water, and it's rapidly digested. You get a huge increase. It's up and down. Casein, on the other hand, such as in yogurt and things like that, or cheese, is water insoluble and is very slowly digested. So it takes a while to peek into the blood, but it's sustained. And you can see that here, right? Here's the leucine concentration. With whey, at about 60 minutes, you get this maximal leucine peak concentration. Meanwhile, casein never reaches where whey does, but it's sustained longer. And we'll talk about if that really means anything. Dr. Gabe Wilson has done some incredible research where he's found that 3 hours after you ingest a meal, protein synthesis shuts off because energy's low. So if you think about that, why would you ever consume casein? Because even though it's sustained for longer, at about 240 minutes, it doesn't really matter because protein synthesis is shut off. So why not get that huge increase with whey and get some more leucine and theoretically a greater protein synthesis than the casein condition? So whey versus casein, again, just like I said, here's percent increase in protein synthesis. Whey has a far superior increase in protein synthesis than casein. So what's the take home? Faster digesting proteins, such as whey, may be ideal for recovery from training. These include egg whites, proteins that are very lean and have very little fat, and whey protein powder, stuff like that. Now we're going to talk about some protein quality. So we know, again, there are 20 amino acids, and we have 9 essential, which must come from our diet, and 11 non-essential that can be made from our body. Only the 9 essential are really the ones that are necessary for muscle protein synthesis. So again, if you look down here, you get the same amount of protein synthesis in just the 9 essentials as you do in all 20 amino acids. So it goes to show you again, the 9 essentials are what's really important. So Campbell et al. In 1999 looked at protein quality. So they looked at a vegetarian, a meat-free diet, compared to an omnivorous diet. And they looked at body composition and strength during 12 weeks of resistance training. Here's what they found. This is changes in lean body mass. The omnivorous group gained about 2 pounds of lean body mass, which is a good amount. The vegetarian group lost a pound of lean body mass. Why is that? Because, again, a lot of the vegetarian sources lack the essential amino acids like we were talking about. So you don't get that huge increase in muscle protein synthesis. It's lacking some of those essential amino acids that we need. So I'm not saying omnivorous is always better than vegetarian necessarily, but vegetarians need to be aware of this, and they need to supplement accordingly with essential amino acids. This is a great study by Garlic, and they basically, all right, so now that we know that the 9 essential amino acids are important, again, what amino acids are responsible exactly for protein synthesis? Well, if you look at all these different conditions, you see over here on the right the glucose plus the essential amino acids. And then you look all the way to the right and you see glucose plus branch chain amino acids, the 3 that we talked about, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And you see the same amount of protein synthesis in the 9 essentials as you do in the 3 branch chain amino acids. So this goes to show you those 3 branch chain amino acids are what's driving the protein synthesis response. So again, if you're going to the store and looking for what you should get, branch chain amino acid supplements are ideal. And more specifically, the leucine content within those branch chain amino acids is key. And that's what this is showing here. Leucine is actually the main driver of protein synthesis. If you break apart the branched chain amino acids, so there's 3 of them, leucine, valine, and isoleucine. If you take branched chain amino acids and compare it to just leucine alone, you see the same amount of protein synthesis. So this again goes to show that leucine is the main driver of protein synthesis. And there seems to be this threshold where leucine is optimized, and that's at about 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine. And so when you go to the store, that's what you want to look for. You want to make sure that each serving that you're taking has about 2 to 3 grams of leucine. So how much per meal? Well, it really depends on the source. Because if you look at beef, for instance, it contains 8% leucine. So in order to maximize protein synthesis, you might need 25 to 36 grams of beef. However, if you come down to whey, you see it has the highest amount of leucine out of any of the others listed. So you might only need 17 to 25 grams to hit that 2 to 3 grams of leucine threshold, right? This was a classic study by Wilson and Norton in 2010, and basically they found that the leucine content of the meal dictates changes in body composition. So the blue is representing muscle, and the red represents fat. And here's some different types of protein. You have wheat, soy, egg, and whey. And next to it are the percentages of leucine within those respective proteins. So wheat has 6%, soy 7%, egg 8.6%, and whey 12%. And you see it's a linear response. As the leucine content goes up, so does muscle. And inversely, so does fat. It goes down more in the whey group than in the wheat and soy groups. Now, distribution. This is something that's huge and is a common problem in our society today. So Dr. Gabe Wilson looked at this, and basically if you look at the typical American diet, they consume about 10 grams of protein for breakfast, about 20 grams for lunch, and then they load up on dinner and have about 60 grams. And this is a huge issue because you can see that threshold for maximum protein synthesis, the typical American is only hitting that one time. And we call that skewed protein distribution. However, on the left is what we call optimal protein distribution. And rather than skewing it, we want to spread those out evenly over breakfast, lunch, and dinner so that we can maximize protein synthesis more often. And this again shows it. If you look at the blue, that's unequally or skewed distribution, and green is equally distributed. And this is muscle weight. So again, it plays a huge impact on how you distribute your protein throughout the day. So how should you consume protein throughout the day? Here's a percentage increase on the left, and you can see the time below. If you look at the top, that's maintained leucine concentration. And you can see muscle protein synthesis stops at about 180 minutes. And this is what I was talking about before. Leucine is still high in the blood. However, muscle protein synthesis, you can see there on the bottom in the circle, is stopped at 180 minutes. And this was a huge discovery that Dr. Gabe Wilson found, that amino acids are still high in the blood, yet we're not synthesizing proteins. Really strange phenomenon. And here was his theory. Here was Dr. Wilson's theory. Protein synthesis is an energetically costly process. It drains the muscle of energy. Lower insulin levels means you take up less glucose, so the muscle does not have the ability or the energy to sustain protein synthesis at about 3 hours following a meal. So what can you do? Well, high levels of carbohydrates increase the energy state of the cell. Also, high levels of leucine raise insulin and increase muscle glucose uptake, also giving the muscle enough energy to continue. So his hypothesis was giving carbs or leucine between meals will maintain protein synthesis. So this is key. So a lot of people consume breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, what this is showing is that it may be ideal to throw in maybe like a Fiber One bar or something like that in between breakfast and lunch, and then lunch and dinner, or even throw down some branched chain amino acids. That way you can maintain protein synthesis. And this is kind of what it would look like. So say you're consuming 4 meals over the course of a day. You get up at 8 a.m., you have breakfast, then you have lunch at 12, then you have an early dinner at 4, and then you have a late night meal at about 8 p.m. It might be beneficial to have carbs and branched chain amino acids in between each one of these meals. That way you can see in the blue line, you eat a meal, you're starting to come down, boom. You reintroduce carbs plus branched chains. You're getting the energy back, so you're maintaining protein synthesis. This was another study by Pat and Jones in 2005, and they looked at the effects of giving 220 calorie carb plus essential amino acid supplement in between normal 800 calorie home meals. So kind of the same concept, and you see greater increases in muscle and protein balance. So overall protein balance is a lot higher throughout the entire day than if you don't have those in-between snacks. So let's tie this all up. Let's bring it together. So some conclusions on protein digestion rate. Again, fast digestion is better for recovery. Something like a whey protein is ideal to directly get into your muscle, get in there fast, and start the recovery process. What about protein timing? Ideally, 30 to 45 minutes before, say you take a pre-workout supplement, with that pre-workout, you're going to have some branched chain amino acids. Again, that contains 2 to 3 grams of leucine. That way, during your workout, the enhanced blood flow is driving those amino acids into the muscle in order to start repairing them. And also, immediately after. Because again, blood flow is still going to be high immediately after your workout. So why not take advantage of that opportunity rather than delay several hours? Protein quality. Again, the higher amino acids and particularly leucine content, the better. So ideally meat and dairy-based products like egg whites, whey, things such of that nature. What about in between meal BCA supplementation? Again, it may be ideal to consume something like a Fiber One bar or a Fiber One bar plus branched chain amino acid drink in between your meals. That way you sustain protein synthesis. You're burning more calories throughout the entire day because protein synthesis is a machine. It keeps going. So really try and incorporate that into your day. That's it. Thank you guys for your time, and we'll be back soon.